Okay, our last blood vessel lecture, we're going to take a look at blood flow to the legs. Blood flow to the legs is not too complicated. It's a little more straightforward than what we were just learning with the abdominopelvic cavity. All right, so blood that's going to head down to the legs. Of course, it's got to pass through the descending aorta, the abdominal aorta, whichever you would like to call it. And then if it's going to the left, it's going to enter this artery right in here that you see, this big one that's called the left common iliac artery. If it's headed over to the right, it's going to pass through the right common iliac artery. And the common iliac artery is actually going to split. There is an internal branch and an external branch. All right, and the bigger of those two branches, if you look right in here, here's your common iliac artery over on the right-hand side. Do you see that little tiny branch right in there? That's your internal iliac artery. Hard to tell in this diagram, but it's actually going to kind of head toward the posterior sections of the bowl of the pelvis and serve tissues that are back in that location. The bigger portion is the external iliac. So the common iliac really continues as the external iliac as it's heading down towards the leg. That then becomes, this is kind of like what we saw with the shoulder and the arm, the external iliac as it moves down into the leg becomes the femoral artery. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. All right, so let me draw these in here. We got common iliac, we got internal iliac that you guys need to know, and then we end up here in the femoral artery. That is a deep, big artery down in the legs. So it's hard to tell on these 2D diagrams from your textbook which ones are deep and which ones are superficial, but the femoral artery is the big, deep one. And then as you keep going down, if you're going down towards the lower leg, kind of hard to tell in this picture, but the femoral artery passes behind the knee, and so that's what we're taking a look at over here, and becomes the popliteal artery. Okay. The popliteal artery is going to divide up into 3 other ones. There is an anterior tibial artery that you need to know, and that one's going to go just where it sounds. It wraps back around onto the front side of the tibia, the anterior side of the tibia. It runs along it, which you can see over here on this side of the diagram as well. Another branch is the posterior tibial artery. So that's going to run along the back side of the tibia. So if you're tracing a drop of blood to the back side of the lower leg, and I tell you it's on the medial side, remember the tibia is medial and the fibula is your lateral bone, you're going to use the posterior tibial artery. If it's going to the front side, like the shin, that blood is going to flow through the anterior tibial artery. And then finally you have a fibular artery, which runs alongside. It's also on the back side of the leg, but that's going to supply blood to the portions of the lower leg around the fibula. Yes, those do then bring oxygenated blood into arteries that serve the foot. We're not going to learn the foot arteries, but just keep that in mind. You have several of those that supply different portions of the foot. Okay, so those are actually the only arteries that you have to learn for the legs. That's pretty straightforward. Returning blood, deoxygenated blood that's on its way back, not all that complicated. I mean, you have the same exact vein names as artery names. So there's an anterior tibial vein that will drain deoxygenated blood off of the front portion of the lower leg along the tibia. You have a fibular vein that drains deoxygenated blood from around the fibula. There is a posterior tibial vein that is draining deoxygenated blood from the back side of the tibia, posterior side of the tibia. It's also receiving blood from a lot of the underside of the foot. You don't have to worry about that though. Okay, so then the deoxygenated blood coming from those 3 veins that we just talked about That's going to enter the popliteal vein. The popliteal vein connects into the femoral vein, and then the femoral vein is going to bring that deoxygenated blood to the external iliac vein, and the external iliac vein will connect into the common iliac vein. And guess where your common iliac vein connects into? It connects into your IVC, your inferior vena cava. So leg blood drop tracing, pretty straightforward once you learn those major arteries and veins and the areas that they serve. There is one other vein I do want you to learn. It will not be part of our blood drop tracing, so keep that in mind. But that one is this one, the great saphenous vein. That is a superficial vein that runs along the inside of the leg. It's the longest individual vein within the body. But it's superficial, so it's going to be draining deoxygenated blood from skin, muscle, other tissues near the surface of the inside of the leg. So you can kind of see that there. And if you follow along in the diagram, it is going to connect up in here to the external iliac vein. It's going to bring that deoxygenated blood to that blood vessel. That'll connect to your common iliac vein, which will then connect to your inferior vena cava. All right, so how about a practice round here with a leg blood drop tracing? Suppose I said, trace a drop of blood from the right atrium to the left lateral lower leg and back. All right, so I do have your whole pulmonary circuit written in there. We're passing our aortic semilunar valve, ascending aorta, aortic arch, descending aorta. And you can continue to call it the descending aorta as it passes through the entire abdominopelvic cavity. We're going to the left, so it's going to take the left common iliac artery as an exit. That becomes the left external iliac artery. That becomes the left femoral artery that's down deep in the leg. That becomes the left popliteal artery. It's along the back side, running along the back side of the knee. And we're going to the left lateral lower leg. So which of our two lower leg bones is lateral? Hopefully you remember the fibula. So we're going to enter the left fibular artery. I did forget to point out, though, that the fibular arteries and veins can also be called the peroneal arteries and veins. That's actually an older term for those, but they're still used. So you guys should be familiar with that terminology. When you see peroneal, P-E-R-O-N-E-A-L, that is referring to fibular. You probably saw that also when you studied the muscles. Remember the fibularis longus muscle, which can also be called the peroneus longus muscle. Sure you do. Sure you can remember that from somewhere deep in the past when you took Biology 201. All right, so we're down in the lower leg along the fibula. We're not going to worry about more specific arteries from there. You'll just say lower leg arterioles, lower leg capillaries, lower leg venules. Then we're back in the left fibular vein, left popliteal vein, left femoral vein. That connects to the left external iliac, left common iliac, inferior vena cava, and the blood travels up the inferior vena cava to the right atrium, and we're done. So the leg ones are pretty straightforward. You just have to remember with the lower leg, fibula versus tibia, and then remember with the tibia you have an anterior tibial artery and vein, and you have a posterior tibial artery and vein as well. All right, so that actually concludes our blood vessel anatomy. See, that one wasn't quite as long. And you may want to check out those blood vessels on Visible Body. I'm not going to bring that up for the legs, but if you're using one of those 3D anatomy apps, they're certainly good to check out because it gives you a better 3D perspective of what's going on versus the two-dimensional diagrams. Do practice identifying these major arteries and veins from the diagrams that I've been showing you, and practice these blood drop tracing. So I will post additional practice ones for you on Blackboard within the learning module, and then your review activity for the test has some example blood drop tracings built in for you to practice with as well. And make up your own to practice with. You don't necessarily have to have one drawn out for you already, because it's not going to do you any good just to try to memorize every possible blood drop tracing you might receive. You do have to learn how these blood vessels are interconnected with each other and which ones go where. All right, again, if you have any questions or concerns, you're confused about any of this, all this routing of blood vessels, post it on Piazza so we can all discuss it together and everybody can benefit.